This is Michael Riccards with the Hall Institute's Public Policy Forum. Our guest today is Dr. Marc Mappen, who is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, and we're talking about, on his bicentennial of his birthday, President Abraham Lincoln. We had the opportunity to talk a little bit previously about Lincoln and his initial travel through New Jersey, a travel that has become famous, of course, because of Lincoln's tremendous historical reputation. And you mentioned there's a National Historical Commission to celebrate this bicentennial, which I'm pleased to be the New Jersey liaison to, and thank the governor for appointing me. Anybody should know that there is a New Jersey website, lincolnbicentennialnj.info, and of course a national website which lists what all the states are doing, especially states like Illinois and Indiana and Kentucky, where Lincoln grew up and where Lincoln is, of course, known for his years that he spent in each of those locales. We know Lincoln, though, not just as a prairie lawyer, but of course of the President of the United States during the gruesome Civil War. And I'm curious, how did Lincoln become Lincoln? How did this prairie lawyer become the greatest president that we've had?
Well, that's a very good question, Michael. And I think part of it you would have to say is because he became the greatest president because he presided or he led the country during its greatest crisis, the most difficult period in its history, the Civil War. You could ask, would Lincoln have been as great, would he have been as the greatest president in American history if he had not lived during the Civil War or not been president then? Well, that's a very good question. You know, it's like asking, would Winston Churchill have been regarded as a great leader if he hadn't had to face World War II? Well, that's hard to say. But Lincoln clearly was a great man. He had so many qualities. We talked about his writing ability, his speaking, his intellect. He also turned out to be a great administrator, a great commander-in-chief. And in fact, Professor McPherson at Princeton has just written a book on Lincoln as commander-in-chief. And so here's a man who had no military training whatsoever, who very closely and carefully directed that war and communicated directly with his generals and his admirals, gave them advice, fearlessly replaced them when he thought they were not performing well, and was probably more intimately involved as a commander-in-chief than any other president. If we're talking about his qualities, on the other hand, he was remarkably humble. Everybody who met him said he was a humble man. He did not put on airs. He was not affected. He was genuine. And he could talk to people. I love this line from Frederick Douglass, the great African-American leader, who said after he spoke to Lincoln the first time, he said, "This is the first time I ever talked to a white man who did not specify that I was a Negro. You know, never brought that up. Talked to him just as another human being." And I think everybody who met Lincoln was impressed with his ability to listen. He was not dogmatic. He was flexible. During the Civil War, you know, when the war began, he was not in favor of emancipation, but he grew in office, and he realized as the war progressed this was something. Now, some people say it was cynical, it was a war measure. Others say it was a sincere part of Lincoln's belief that it was necessary to emancipate the slaves. But whatever the motive was, he did it. He accomplished what many had talked about but nobody else had done.
What would Lincoln have been like if, in fact, he had lived beyond his assassination and gotten involved in the whole Reconstruction politics of the later period?
Well, you know, you never can know for sure. That's what-if history. What if this happened, or what if that didn't happen? And there's been speculation. It used to be kind of the gone with the wind attitude was that Reconstruction was a terrible thing because it oppressed the South. And if only Lincoln had lived, he would have been more moderate, and the whole Reconstruction would have been much different. And in a way, that's true, but it assumes that Reconstruction was bad, that Reconstruction was wicked. That was the view that was presented in Gone with the Wind. Remember that the noble people of the South were being crushed. But I think that's less and less plausible these days. I think the feeling now is that the problem with the Reconstruction was not that it happened, but that it was a failure, that it was stopped, that it wasn't permitted to extend and guarantee the civil rights of the newly emancipated slaves. So what would Lincoln have done? Well, he was a flexible man. He was able to compromise, and it's thought that, or guessed, that if he had remained as president, he would have made Reconstruction better. He would have more firmly guaranteed the rights of African Americans. But, you know, again, we really don't know. It's kind of guessing. The one thing we do know, I guess, that his successor, Andrew Johnson, was a disaster, and that Johnson was a vindictive man, a racist of sorts, and that the situation would have been much better if had Lincoln remained as president.
You know, Lincoln was a fairly young man when he assumed the presidency. People forget that. They look at the pictures of him. He looks so old in them, especially as the war progressed.
Yeah.
But he could have very easily have run for a third term.
Well, he was a successful politician. He was the first president since Andrew Jackson to be elected to 2 terms. And there was no amendment that would have prohibited a third term, so it's possible.
And he didn't do very well in New Jersey either time, though.
Well, yes. New Jersey was the only northern state to vote against Abraham Lincoln, not once, but twice. And it has sometimes been said that New Jersey was a copperhead state, sympathized with the South. That is not quite true. That for much of the war, the Democrats were in power in New Jersey, and the governor, Joel Parker, was a Democrat, but he was not a peace Democrat. He was not somebody who said we should capitulate, stop the war. He, too, wanted the Union preserved.
We're talking about New Jersey and its usual contrarian impulses. I've been talking to one of our New Jersey historians, Dr. Marc Mappen, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, and we've been talking about Abraham Lincoln. And we come to celebrate his bicentennial this year. His birthday was February 12th, 1809. And now, 200 years later, we've come to really discuss what his contributions have been to the Union and to the American people, as we come to understand ourselves better, and Lincoln's famous trip through New Jersey, where he declared us to be an almost chosen people. Thank you.